Hey Donna, thank you so much for being here. This is going to be one of many videos that we do. What we're calling as episodes. It's something we wanted to do for a while now, right? Whole Canadian immigration space, a lot of changes that have been coming through in that space. I want to just mention a few things around the sort of the focus of the different episodes, and then we'll get into your background, and what you have done so far, and then we'll get into the different sort of dynamics of what's currently happening with the immigration space, challenges, pitfalls, opportunities, things like that, right? So this is going to be a series of episodes, and the core focus is going to be on Canadian immigration through different facets of Canadian immigration, right? We're going to start off very macro, getting into certain types of challenges and opportunities that lies ahead. We're going to be talking about different elements like IRCC, how they view things, institutes, and all that good stuff, right? Work permits and all that good stuff. So that's going to be the scope of these series of episodes that we have. And I'm really excited for this collaboration, Donna. I know it's something we wanted to do for a while. Now, I just want to say a couple of things before I pass it on to you for introductions, right? This is, my sort of perspective. You have a very impressive background, right? Like, and I think when I say background, I mean, you have a background that is quite diverse, right? I think your background is in psychology, right? And then you got into immigration and stuff like that. I want to talk about that journey, like what kind of led you down that path, right? But you've got a very amazing, you got a phenomenal background. And one of the things, Donna, that really inspired me about you is, I would say it's two things. First thing I would say is more on the work ethics, the grind, side of it, where you want to just get things done. You have a focus in mind. You want to get that done. I think that ambition to get things done, that drive is sort of organically in you, and that's one of the things I'm really inspired by you. The other thing is, it's just the ability of consuming the knowledge in a very short period of time, right? And the way I look at you, and the reason I call you, Dynamite Donna, is mainly because the level of experience that you have cultivated over the last couple of years is equivalent to a person who's done 20, 25 years in the field, and I think that's a testament of the environment that we're in currently in immigration, because it's challenging right now. We'll talk about all this stuff, but when challenges comes is when really leaders sort of step up, right? And the way I look at you is the breadth of knowledge that you have accumulated over the last couple of years. It's a testament to how successful you are as an immigration consultant, right? So I want to just preface by saying that I know we've been a long time friend, but just professionally, what you have done over the last couple of years, and just the knowledge that you have gotten is very inspiring to me. So I want to kick it off first by if you could provide an introduction about yourself, right? And then I want to get into the crux of the episode, talk about the dynamics of immigration and all. So let me take a pause here, Donna. I'll pass it on to you for introductions.
Thank you, Adi. So very gracious intro. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things for the listeners. I believe I'm more like TNT Donna, just because I've been around for a while now, it feels like. I have been working in Canada for over almost 2 decades, 20 years now. I started working when I was 16. My first job was in Wonderland in Canada. So I've been kind of a worker in Canada for the last 20 years. And I think that perspective drives the energy and drives kind of the work ethic, right? Like, how do I see myself progressing over the next 20 years? And then I would say that my background would be, I did do my bachelor's in psychology, but I believe what prompted that was the mindset of community service. I volunteered when I was in high school. The idea of volunteering as an immigrant was something that was new to me, right? So we were coming up, I grew up in India, I grew up in the Middle East. Community service was not something that was ingrained into us there. It was just achievement, right? When I came to Canada here, community service was something that was put in as a requirement young, and working for those community service hours, I did reading to young kids, right? I was reading in the library to little kids, and I gained my community service hours doing that. I think that background really gave me a push into, hey, I like doing this. I like helping people, whether it's of different ages, whatever you're trying to do. I worked in corrections for a little bit, so that pushed the legal side of things, the compliance aspect of things, and yeah, I think combined with a little bit of hard work and luck, in combination, we are where we are today. And I'm happy to give my advice to other immigrants, other workers in Canada, what it takes to survive, right?
Yeah, awesome. So one thing I did have a question. I mean, before we kind of kick things off, is so you are an RCIC licensed immigration advisor. Is it advisor or consultant, first of all?
It's a consultant. So
Okay.
I advise people in Canada on their options for immigration, on their options for staying in Canada, depending on what they want to do, whether it's work, study, start a business, stay here temporarily, then go back. So
Gotcha. And your background is pretty impressive. You got psychology. You've done psychology. You've done a couple of things. And I know you mentioned community service. Why specifically immigration?
I think immigration is the backbone. Having traveled, I traveled extensively even prior to being in immigration. I think that really set down the foundation for gaining an understanding of how important it is to a country, right? I've been an immigrant myself a couple times now. When we moved from India to Dubai, for example, that was one being an immigrant with my family, right? I went off and studied in the UK for a little bit by myself as an international student. That was also a certain way, immigrant kind of lifestyle that I was introduced to, the one where I was battling by myself. I think that the personal experiences of being in immigration myself and having been an immigrant myself kind of fuels this, makes it a lot more personal.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Now, getting to the crux of it, so I mean, so Canadian immigration, right? I'll give you a perspective. Again, I'm an outside-in person, right? My background is in tech, but immigration has been something that is very interesting to me, right? Mainly because of the changes that have transpired over the last couple of months. We recently had a federal election, right? Mark Carney, now the Prime Minister of Canada. Prior to that was still a Liberal-led government by Justin Trudeau. Let me kick off a very sort of abstract level question, right? What has changed in the immigration dynamics? How would you describe the change from last year to this year? Right.
Strategic, right? The changes are very strategic right now to economic priorities. That's what I would say. So they are definitely a lot of changes, and that is causing stress in your environment. But the changes are by no means unwarranted, in my opinion. I think that it's a very targeted change that they're making on the type of immigration Canada wants to see in the next upcoming years and the immigrants they want to bring in. I'm all for it.
So what are the changes in the sense that not at a micro level, but if you at a macro level, if you take a look at mid of last year, right? Because November I think was a pivotal point. Keep me honest over here.
Sure.
IRCC kind of started tightening things up, right, in terms of policies and all that stuff. Downstream impact on institutes, the way that we process applications and all that stuff. I think the genesis of that when we were talking was really November of last year, right? But let's talk about the environment prior to that. What was the general sentiment of people coming into Canada? What were the most popular pathways, and how has that changed right now? Is it just caps on the number of students? Is it the quality that we're requiring a lot more to come into Canada? Is it certain financial requirements that are needed? Like, what has changed fundamentally from what it was before and what it is right now?
Great question. So when you talk about the timeline, I believe it was actually a little bit earlier than that, right? I think the hard changes, you're right, started coming about November 2024. But as early as January that year, the government started signaling that we were going to start making these changes, right? And I believe a lot of these changes came about because we were coming out of COVID. A lot of a lot of policies, temporary policies that were put in place to support people and keep students being able to come and study during COVID were being pulled back. Now, a lot of them were only going back to what they were before. As an example, during COVID, there was a temporary measure where if you were a student, right, and you graduated and you wanted to have your spouse continue to stay with you, you had to have a job in a certain level, right? During COVID, they rolled that back. They said it doesn't matter. As long as you get a job, any job, we will give your spouse a work permit as well. Now, when they rolled that back, people were very surprised because a lot of those students, of course, came in those 3 years where that temporary policy was in place, right? But what I was trying to tell students is this is going back to what it was before. Previously, you had to show proof of being in tier 0, 1, 2, 3. They're just bringing that back, and that's because we're coming out of immigration. Now, not every one of the rules has been like that. Some of them have been brand new enforcements, and I think even that's come about because of trying to put a cap on certain number of, I guess, increased diversity, or whether it be not put a stress on housing market in certain areas. So I definitely believe there was a link between policy, like housing needs, for example, and the immigration policies. Those were some of the key things that I think went into play when making the changes or when considering.
Yeah. So I mean, let's see. The reason I'm asking that question is because when I came to Canada, right, and I have a similar background to you, right. I'm born in India. I grew up in Dubai. Stayed there for about 8-10 years or so, and then we finally made the move to Canada. That was a strategic decision that was made, by my parents, right?
Yeah.
And the reason for that was education, right? Education was at the core of it, right? And I think that's a general sentiment that a lot of folks with similar backgrounds to us who came into Canada in sort of the early 2000s, right? It was sort of the general sentiment on why you want to kind of move to Canada and for the well-being of your child, your education, healthcare was a big thing as well, right? A lot of these sort of different value factors, right? But back then, immigration was tough, right? I remember, right? Immigration was tough, and it could be a perspective. Feel free to feel free to counter me on that one. Immigration was tough because it was, at least the way I went through it, was that, well, my parents went through it because I was a minor then, was that there was a lot of due diligence that needed to be done to get to where you are right now. Now, the reason I bring that sort of backdrop up is because if you take a look at COVID, right, and the cushioning around COVID, a couple of years prior and after COVID, there's been a huge influx of immigration. I mean, these are numbers, right? These are numbers that is publicly available in the immigration sites and stuff like that. There's been a pretty big influx of immigrants. Is that an indication that it was easing at that point in time and now back to tightening up to what the original gold standard was? Or what is your perspective on that?
I think so. You make an interesting point. I think the kind of immigration has slowly changed over time, and I think the numbers have reflected sort of different needs of what Canada wants, right? So, for example, back in the day, I believe, like you were talking about in the early 2000s, a lot of highly skilled permanent residents were coming in, right? So those were kind of I want to say those were your chunk of immigrants that were coming in, your highly skilled landed permanent residents, right? I think slowly over time that became more and more temporary residents, students coming in, and they got younger and younger. That put a lot of stress as well, because when you're a young student and you're sold, unfortunately, the false narrative that you can graduate grade 12 in wherever you're from, you come to Canada, you'd study a couple years, and then you'll get PR. That's a false narrative that a lot of these people unfortunately sold, right? So when you come here with that narrative, and 3 years after you've put in time and money, and you're expecting to get what you were unfortunately promised by someone unscrupulous, right? You're thinking, how am I ever going to do this? And it's still possible. I think if you're looking at it, and you can target, rural areas, job markets in need. and you could try, but it really makes it hard for those individuals. And unfortunately, I believe the majority of temporary residents over the last couple years with those individuals, right? So I think that's where the disconnect happened between, is, and in a way, yes, the comprehensive ranking score for express entry has continued to go up and up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's because overall people are educating themselves more. You're getting more and more kind of people with master's degrees or PhD degrees, and language is a huge problem, Adi. I think in my experience of consulting, I can tell you that I have met with many people who have the perfect profile minus language,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would tell you the only reason why I'm sitting in front of you today, potentially as 20 years later as an immigrant, is because my mom, she took the language test for our family. She did really well on it. She got nines in every category, right?
I remember that too. Yep.
Made us get selected, right? So it wasn't necessarily easier back then. It was still hard. She tells me she walked around with her Walkman on her ears for like 2 months straight trying to prep for the exam and get the vocabulary, get the accent, and that impacted her score greatly. So I think immigrants used to put a lot of importance on language, maybe the ones that were successful, and I think to continue to be successful, they still have to put that importance on language, and I think that can affect how quickly you get selected as well.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that sentiment that you shared. I think the bucket of immigration sort of individuals and families that were coming in at the early 2000s and what it is right now is changed. I think it's a younger group, and we have mutual friends and even some personal friends that have come in over the last couple of years, through the study permit program. And I do share the same sentiment with you, Donna, is that I think there's a reality of what you can do in Canada, and there's a marketing side of it, right? And I think there's a pretty big disconnect there, right? Because if I take a look at the sales that these agents, education agents, these folks sort of do back home, and I'm not, it's not a one size fits all narrative. It's certainly not that, but I think there is certainly a sentiment that needs to be pointed out that these agents kind of, they package up a very, very good narrative, right? That sell the students on this is sort of the life and life at the end of the tunnel, hopes and dreams and all that stuff you can get in Canada. Now reality sets in when you come here, right? When you come here, all of a sudden, there are strict policies you got to follow. When I say strict policies, I mean, if you're coming here as a student, you cannot work, intricate details like that, right? There are certain modifications you have to essentially do to make that happen, right? And there are certain classifications of what, based on what you're trying to come here and do, what the pathway for you in Canada really looks like, right? And I think the hope that these students come in here with is different than the reality of what they have been applying to come here, right? And the other thing I just want to share here before I pass it on to you to get your feedback on this is a lot of these education agents, they refer students to programs, like institutional sort of programs here in Canada, right? Yeah. Not necessarily aligned with their overall vision, right? And I think that's pretty sad to hear, right? A lot of these people who invest, because it's not cheap to come to Canada, right? You're coming here, I think you're spending a minimum of about $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 annually, right, on your tuition and stuff like that. But they've been really placed in a program that doesn't give them the vision of what they aspire to be, right? And they have to come here and correct course and pay up the difference to correct their course and go down the path of what they wanted to do. So these are the sentiments that I am hearing. I wanted to kind of get your take on it. From your experience, and you talk to so many folks, do you see the same narrative, or what is your take on that? Let me ask you.
I do. I've got some very interesting, comments from students and clients when I work with them. So students tell me, for example, Canada is the most overhyped place, the number one overhyped place. You hear all these things, you hear all these stories, then you come in and you're like, wait a second, what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's partly a little bit of both, right? I think there needs to be some responsibility as an immigrant when you're choosing to come to a new place, right? And I don't know why this has happened specifically for Canada, Adi, but maybe you can give me kind of the layman's reason, right? Because what I would never expect, for example, someone who was planning on going to US or Australia, right, or the UK to take advice on how to do that from the uncle down the road, right?
Yeah.
Also had a nephew who went to US or Australia. You'd never do that. You wouldn't listen to that uncle. You'd go the other way. You'd be like, no, it's okay. I'll hire someone to take me to the US. But for Canada, that's okay. That's almost acceptable now. It's like, it's what you want to do. You want to talk to and when students come and tell me, or when clients tell me, well, my friend told me that this is possible in Canada, I go, who's your friend? Who is this person who's telling you this? I really want to know, right? And you see it. You see all these kind of education consultants who have propped up because they sent their daughter to Canada and they realized, wait a second, that agent who took advantage of me to send my daughter, I could do the same thing, right? And I don't get it for it. And there are your agents who are very good at what they do. They've done this for years. They work with consultants like myself in Canada to educate students. And then they're the ones who just put up a board and say, I'm an education consultant and are working with one college in a random street, right? And taking a hefty commission from that college to send students there. So I think those kind of practices have been really curbed by the recent policies.
Yeah.
That makes me excited. Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like an axe was taken to immigration at a certain level, right? Like I've seen campuses, for example, that were teeming with diversity that unfortunately were impacted because of a few other greedy colleges who did not respect that integrity in bringing in students, right? What type of students? Where are they coming from? Are they actually interested in doing this? So I think that level of integrity was lost over the last couple of years, and hopefully what Carney's government can do is resurrect that, because I think that would be the most helpful thing that we can do, where the narrative becomes you shouldn't be taking advice from anyone. It should be licensed, or they should be someone who is backed by someone who's licensed. And I think that's why you're seeing all these tools come up now, like your background in AI was super impressive, because the combination of connecting what you're supposed to do and giving you that information in a simple, easy to understand manner was missing for immigration, right? So I think that's helpful, and that's game changer, and helps Canada achieve what they want to do in terms of regaining its integrity for its immigration system.
Yeah, I think if I take a look at the education agents, and again, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of narrative, right? But I think there has been a level of exploitation that has been done, right? And I'm glad that the government is sort of stepping in to start regulating that flow. Because at the end of the day, who's the victim? The victim are the folks that are trying to come in here and they've been given these hopes, and the reality is something else, right? And that's really hurtful, because you're spending a lot of time, a lot of money, you're crossing borders and all that stuff. It's not going to be easy. You know, what's interesting to me is, and this is because I've been doing some investigation on let's just take an example of a student, right? A student coming here from India, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of students come in here from India, a lot. Mm-hmm. But it's not, I mean, of course, you got Ecuador, you got Colombia, you got a lot of German students, France, et cetera. But if I just focus on India, what's interesting about India is that they have these. So by the time you're in grade 10, right, you have you've done a grade 10 exam, and that kind of dictates what your next journey in your life is going to look like, right? In India, grade 10 is sort of your high school equivalent, right? You've done a grade 10, and now once you get your marks on your grade 10 exams, then really you have the two pathways to choose. Do you want to educate yourself in India, or do you want to go abroad? Now, certain pockets in India prefer going abroad. Certain pockets in India, like that's of Mumbai, Delhi, the metropolitan sort of areas, they educate themselves, a lot more educate themselves locally in India, and they do post-grad abroad, right? But regardless of it, they go through something called coaching classes, right? Now, coaching classes are very interesting. The way that, and I've got a lot of relatives back home as well, they call them as like sort of hawks, right? As soon as they smell the child is, just past your 10th and getting into the 11th, all of a sudden you got a whole bunch of marketing material coming to the house saying that, oh, do you want to do this? You want to go to Canada, UK, Australia, blah, 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 all that good stuff, right? So you have all these coaching classes, and the scope of the coaching classes is to prepare you for, you got two types of coaching classes. One is for internal, you want to study in one of the top universities in India, for example. There's coaching classes to prepare you to go down that path, and you have coaching classes, and a majority of them that focus on international enablement, right? And that includes language, getting the language stuff together, includes preparing them for essentially communication, reading skills, and all that stuff. What kind of colleges, what kind of universities to go to, and all of that. Now, the issue lies here, in my opinion, and this is a long story of me to tell you the issue. The issue lies here. The issue lies in compliance, right? Okay, so you've done your language, you're preparing yourself on your background, you're kind of strengthening your backbone to come internationally. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's the right thing to do. I would do that too if I'm in that generation. Okay. Problem arises with your background. You're trying to come into a country with compliance. Now, that's where the issue strikes, because all these coaching classes, and an extension to that, the local education agents and immigration advisors, right, that are local in those countries, they're not licensed by Canadian immigration authorities, right? They don't have an RCIC license like you, Donna, right? That know the crux of it. I mean, you get pulled into IRCC meetings, and all you're in the gist of it. Like you are in the center of equation when you understand the policy changes, you implement those policy changes, you advise on those policy changes. Now, the folks internationally don't know that, right? And I think if I take a look at the true problem statement on why these troubles really arise, right? It's the compliance, it's the enablement of compliance of these students or work permits or whatever coming here to Canada, right? I'm not discounting that the hopes and dreams have been more than aggressive in terms of marketing, right? But I think the compliance piece is super critical. Something as simple as a check mark in your, and we've talked about this, something as simple as a check mark in your permit form can derail what your next step or what your next journey in Canada would look like, right? I mean, that's a very big narrative for me to say that there's a lot of moving parts that students engage in when they're coming internationally, for example, in Canada, right? But there are different pieces that they have to understand. What can they trust locally and what they have to trust internationally, right? In an ideal world, students, people who want to come to Canada, should use a combination of the resources that they have in-house in their local home country, right? Coupled with international experience of people who actually work in that country. I think that's where the gap really lies. Let me take a pause over here. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the responsibility really needs to fall on the local governments in these foreign countries, Adi. Like, for example, if you're sending your students from your country, these students are of this nationality coming to Canada to study, and you see masses of them being sent back, or masses of them getting into trouble for being sold a false narrative or engaging in these activities just to get their status, right? I think at a certain point, the government should get involved and say, okay, well, how Canada has something called College of Immigration Consultants. They have something called as, the Law Society. if these organizations are regulating in Canada, shouldn't we also ensure that whoever is having this business, this practice here in India, selling to students going to Canada, they should either have this license or
Correct.
work with someone who has this license. Otherwise, they shouldn't be operating, and that is to protect our students going abroad. Right. I'm not really seeing that responsibility being taken by foreign governments, even though it's so much information is out there on what's happening to these international students and how they're being taken advantage of. Right. I think it's really like, I'm not like, Canada can only do so much, right? Canada can't necessarily go to these countries and police whoever is diverging or being divergent, right?
Yeah.
What they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
So I think the local governments need to step up. They need to take more responsibility. And I've always wanted to speak with someone in these local governments, if possible, to say, why isn't this something that we're doing, right?
Yeah, because if you think about it, that's the core fundamentals of what a foreign affair, the Department or Ministry of Foreign Affairs does, right? They protect their citizens internationally, right? I think that's one of the core mandates, right? And these students are coming in, and it's so upsetting for me to see this. These students are coming here from abroad, and they've been taken advantage of monetarily, right? And they're paying their. I know so many of them that living in basements, right? They don't, and I feel bad because. And look, it's not the sentiment that everyone does this, right? I don't want people to, but I've seen both sides of the spectrum. I've seen people do really successful. So I'm a graduate of University of Waterloo. I've done my master's and PhD over there, albeit I didn't finish my PhD. But I have worked with top class sort of IIT students who are coming in over here. They've done some phenomenal publications, gone down the happy path of getting their PhD, now working at heads of departments and stuff like that. There is that vision. There is that pathway you can have if you get things done right? But then there's the other side of the spectrum that I think people should also realize. It's not all butterflies and confettis and all that stuff. There's the other side of the spectrum where it is a monetary drain if you don't prepare yourself well, right? Because the cost of living over here is substantially higher than some of the other countries, right? And so I see the other side of the spectrum as well, that people are, living in basements, right? And frankly, I've been in certain conversations with them where they say, I'm so glad that I'm able to see light. Something as basic as that, right? And it's very sad for me to hear these things because it's not. I get the struggle, but I think if people educate themselves on how they can get here with the appropriate direction and the appropriate manner, you can be a much happier person with that expectation set for you from the beginning of your journey. Right?
Yeah, I want to talk about it's really sad. I agree when you see these situations because again, I think policy has failed them to a certain extent, right? And whoever sent them here has failed them as well, right?
Correct.
Because you're coming with a certain impression that it is going to cost you a certain, like only recently, for example, did Canada even update the funds that you had to show from $10,000 to $20,635. Very glad that change came in, right? But if you saw the universities that were sending kind of colleges and universities both equally to be blamed on this one, the packages that was being sent out to student on what was the affordability, what was the cost of living in Canada, a lot of them were very outdated, right? And they had to be updated to inform students, this is how much it's actually going to cost you to come to Canada and pay rent and afford groceries. So it's good. I'm very glad that number has been updated because I think it's more accurate on what it actually costs now. And number two is, unfortunately, when I say policy has failed these students, is I tell students all the time, if you're a student here in Canada and you're struggling in passing a course, because it is a different style of learning, right? Yeah, you and me studied in India. It's a lot more of you have to memorize and then you just vomit information.
Correct.
And
Yes. Yeah.
application based, and that kind of wrapping your head around application took myself a lot of formative years, grade 9 to grade 12, to understand how to do this, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to expect someone, and it's reasonable to expect that you might fail a course, right? Especially when you're trying to work and study and pay your tuition fees. And when you do fail, you have to stop working. You can't work 24 hours a week. So now you're not studying, you're not working, you still have to pay your rent, you still have to buy groceries. What do you do, right? And you kind of keep falling into deeper and deeper of an issue. If you stay longer out, if the longer you stay out of school, the deeper of an issue you fall into, right? So I always tell you, if you have a hint of a doubt that you think you might not do well in a course, come and talk to us early. Come and see us early. Do not wait till the last minute, till you see the failed grade, and then come running to us. There's not much that we can do at that point, right? So I think unfortunately grades are kind of put to a side sometimes in some students, and that leads you into a really dangerous path where you could go down that path where all of a sudden you're living with 20 people in a basement because that's all you can afford, right? So I think education early on the importance of staying on top of things, education early on the costs it's going to run you to live in Canada, right? So those are a couple of things, key pieces that are missing when unscrupulous agents get into the picture, right? They do not give you that full picture. You are sold the narrative of, oh yeah, you can work however long you want. You can't afford your studies, just stop studying and work for a bit, right?
Yeah.
See that when students come and tell me, they go, I need to take a break because I can't afford my education. And that always throws me for a loop, because I'm going, well, if you need to take a break because you can't afford your education, what are you planning on doing? Because you can't work.
Yes. Yeah.
So how is that going to solve the problem? If anything, you should quit your studies, go back home, right? Get more money, reapply for a study permit when you're ready, and come back. If I understand you can run into financial situations. I remember, and this is a personal story, I had to come back because I couldn't afford my education abroad, right? I realized if I have to actually do well in the UK, I have to immigrate there. And that's the only way this is going to make sense, right? And that was after me coming to the realization, wait a second, my parents already immigrated to Canada. Why am I trying to go and immigrate somewhere else? So I cut my losses and I came back, right? I could have done the alternative, which would have been gone underground, start working for cash. I'm not sure where that would have ended me, but I always tell students to focus on the long term, even though the short term might seem easier and more lucrative and harder sometimes and easier to achieve, right? Like, I could just make cash. Well, you could also get into a lot of trouble and no one will come to help you because you're an unauthorized worker, right?
Yep.
You could just stay put, tell the government that you want an extension because you messed up on one course, not work for those 4 months, come back, finish your course properly, right? Get your PGWP, then work full time. So I think that education on when you get desperate, don't go for the easiest route. That is not where you want to be. That is just going to land you into more trouble. And that's really where the education piece comes in here, trying to unteach students what they've been taught wrongly about Canada, and what you can do when you get into trouble is not what you should be doing or what you've been told you should do, right? So correcting that thought process is a big part of what I do as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense, because I mean, the influx of students that you get, Donna, I know you're always on the phone, you always got a person, you kind of helping a student. Every time I hop on a call with you, you're always with the student. Let me put it that way, right? Whether it's on a weekday or weekend. So I mean, the volume of students that you help, I mean, certainly is a testament of your experience in the field, right? And I think that's why you have a lot of these repeat customers. They kind of go through the journey with you, and that's the most important part, right? Now, interesting, you said a lot of interesting things over there. Is it fair to say that if I take a look at IRCC right now, a lot of policy changes. Is it fair to say that they're tightening?
Yes, very much so.
Is it fair to say that the student caps that have been put forward by IRCC is to reduce the immigration count, or is it to increase the quality? That's a tough one.
It's a little bit of both. So
Okay.
they want to keep the levels of immigration no more. I believe it's no more than 1% of the total population, right?
Yeah.
So they want to keep it at a certain level, and they do not want it to go above that level for the next foreseeable couple years. On top of that, they want to increase the quality of who are these applicants that we're bringing in, and why is it that, for example, some of them say they can speak a language, but they need a translator. So I think all these kind of cans of worms have been opened up because of COVID, because of certain people finally coming out and being honest about maybe the troubles that they have gotten into because of going with these kind of practices and working with these agents. And I think that is awoken immigration to a certain extent, right? So we're seeing these kind of policy changes come about. And I think we're just going to see more of them, but I'm not sure the cap is going to be lifted anytime soon as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the right thing, because in many ways it kind of the supply and demand, pretty classic, pretty basic as well, right? And it's very important to how an economy runs, supply and demand. COVID was a different time. It had an influx of immigration. A lot of them are going back right now, unfortunately. I know within folks mutually and within the circle who I know has packed up their bag within a couple of days and headed back home. And I helped them book tickets. It's very unfortunate, but that's just how it is. Now, okay, so IRCC is tightening. They've got valid reasons to do that. And it's also the good for the students who want to come here with an expectation that, this is a ground reality. I think that's the message that's been going on, right? That's the message that's being resonated, is that it's, there is a old Canada and there's a new Canada, right? And I think that message is slowly but steadily, I think that's being resonated. Certainly over here, the sentiment has been resonated, right? I don't know internationally if that has been resonated just as yet, but that's certainly been happening over here. So is it fair to say that, look, you have different classes of immigrations, right? Like you have your study permits, you have your work visas, you got people who are applying for PR, blah, blah, blah. You got different avenues, right? Express entries and all that stuff. If I just focus on international students, right? Is Canada still welcoming to international students?
100%.
And what would be your justification on that?
Canada needs immigration. The backbone of this country is immigration, but we're again being very strategic about who we are bringing in right now, Adi. And I think that's the most important policy change that has happened, right? Yeah. So, like I was telling you, like the biggest group of students for a long time were your students who are coming right out of high school. Right. And unfortunately, a lot of them would come here and get married quite early as well. So then now you have two people who are not very well educated, can't speak the language very well. Right. They're paying a whole bunch of money for an education that probably might not land them a job. It puts a lot of stress on them and our economy. Right. Because now those two, essentially, in my opinion, those two visas and work permits could have been given to someone who was able to contribute to the economy more in terms of getting a more a better paying job or being able to integrate themselves into the community because they speak the language, for example. So I think that focus on immigrants who speak good English and good French has really come about, and I'm very happy for that. I do advising for the International Language Academy of Canada, which is one of the largest language schools here in Canada, and the focus has always been language, right? So even recently, because of that focus on language, ILAC has opened up KISS for French. We call them KISS, which is online learning availability. So you can learn English online, you can learn French online. And I think these kind of programs should be availed more than, let's say, coming to Canada for a random business program or a random computer program, right? If you are interested in coming to Canada, I would say start your homework, and you're still a student. It's not that Canada doesn't want you. It's that maybe you just need to develop more of a background before you come in, right? And it might be easier for you to get a master's in your home country. It might be cheaper for you to get your master's in your home country, right? Work for a couple years in your home country, then come to Canada with foreign experience, with even a terminal degree like a PhD if you want, right? And you will assimilate yourself so much faster and so much easier than, let's say, if you were coming directly out of high school. So Canada is rewarding those students who are coming at those higher levels, right? So right now, if you're coming with a master's, if you're coming to do your master's in Canada, you can still bring your spouse, right? They've removed that availability of bringing your spouse with you for college level diploma programs, because I guess the quality of students who are being brought in for those programs was not very good, right? You were getting numbers, but you were not getting quality. So the focus has changed a little bit. It's by no means that Canada is not interested in bringing in students at all. I think it's very much interested in bringing students, the right type of students.
And I think that's the right sentiment to kind of narrate out there. And you know, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, because that's a ground reality, what's happening over here. There's a lot of narrative that's going around, right? So what do we see from a perspective that where you have the core competency in this, and what am I viewing, and kind of sharing that with the viewers, right? Now, it's interesting. You mentioned you're advising an institute as well. And I know you've been doing this for several other institutes over the course of your experience, or over the course of your journey. You know, if I just focus on study permits, and it's a hefty chunk of people who come here as a study, you know, through the study permit program, right? What would be your advice to those students who are coming here for a study permit, right? And it's a very broad range, because study permit is not, you know, it's not just people who are coming in from high school. It's also postgrads and all these things. What would be your advice to them?
Plan ahead. So start thinking about this much earlier. So if you're planning on coming in 2026, you should really start doing your homework around 2024, right? 2 years in advance. And like you're saying, the students in grade 10 in India who are being approached by these vultures, right? Rightly so, that would be the right time to approach someone if you're thinking of leaving the country 2 years later. So taking that same approach where you're being proactive before you come to Canada on where am I going to go? Which province am I going to go to? Does this province match with my affordability? Right? Just like the US, Canada, in every province has very different rules, right? We're municipal, provincial, federal. So certain municipalities, certain provinces are a lot kinder to first timers, right? To newcomers, immigrants, because they're trying to attract people into these places. So if you were a student coming into Canada, I would target those sort of places, because I'm going to get more access to resources to help me out. I'm going to get a lesser crowd of people trying to vie for those same resources, right? So I think doing my homework on where I'm going, how much it's going to cost me, what is my long-term plan, and not rushing the process, right? Being really realistic with yourself. If your intention is dual, right? So if you have the dual intention of, I want to come to Canada, but I also want to immigrate to Canada at some point, right? That is fine. That is totally okay. And Canada promotes someone who is coming with a dual intention to come study in Canada. But if you are coming with the intention of, I want to immigrate to Canada, and studies is just kind of a route that I'm going to take to immigrate, there's a reason why immigration says don't do that. Right. And it's because if that's your mindset, if your mindset is on one track like that, you're most likely going to fall into these traps of people saying, get your immigration, get your paperwork done in 3 years, and you're going, okay, cool, I'll take this option because it seems quick and easy. So immigration in Canada is not an easy path. If that is your long-term goal, plan for it in advance. Do studies in India or wherever you're from, and do studies in your home country, do studies in Canada as well. Combination is always good. Recently, I had a client who was calling me, a potential person who was calling me to immigrate to Canada, and she said, I want to work in Canada. I said, okay, well, what have you completed in India? So she just finished her master's in India. And I asked her, where have you worked? I've never worked in my life. Okay. So in Canada, you can come
no internships, anything like that. Got it. Okay.
No, nothing formal. Nothing formal. She can report as, get a job letter or pay stubs or an employment agreement. She did what most students in India do, which is go directly from bachelor's to master's.
Yep.
Right. And it's fine. You can do that. But I would say the next step, if you want to come abroad, is also work a little bit, right? That 2-3 years of foreign work experience gives you points to your profile. It is a strategic thing that you can do to work first before you decide to come to Canada. So you have something to compare it to at least, right? You have some experience in familiar grounds before you come into a new place to work for the first time in your life. So my advice to her was call me back in a couple of years once you've got some work experience under your belt, and don't fall for the people who tell you, give me this amount of money and I'll bring you to Canada on a work permit. I don't think that's going to necessarily help you. So I think that kind of being honest with yourself in terms of, okay, I really need to plan well in advance, and it's going to take a little bit of studies in my home country and work in my home country before I become someone who Canada wants to bring in directly as a permanent resident. And if I'm much younger and I just want to come for studies, being realistic with myself about the fact that it's going to take me 5, 7, 8 years to put in that time to then get the work permit, to then work in Canada, and then get my permanent residence if I still want to at that point. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I want to share a sentiment that, I want to share a perspective, not a sentiment, rather a perspective on what you just said, right? Because a lot of people, you're kind of very grounded, Donna, and I appreciate that about you. You kind of give a reality check, but not a lot of people do that, right? It's a client that's coming in, it's an opportunity to make money, right? And so a lot of people, what they end up doing is they would do the work regardless of them not know, even if they know, they would do the work regardless, not really caring about the future of the client, right? And I think that holds true for people who are coming here to work as well as study, right? Because and I met this, and I know this person that I just met a couple of weeks ago, and she was telling me that. So I asked her, I said, okay, when you came to Canada, right, how much did it cost you? Okay, so you had medical exams, you had biometrics, you had this whole bunch of things that they had to do that costed money. This is mitigating how much it really costs to be here to educate yourself, right, which is again about $35,000-$40,000. But I asked her, what was the cost of you to get the appropriate consultation for you to come here? Right, just that consultation piece, that guidance, that compliance. What did that cost you? $0. And I said, okay, how did that happen? It was a education agent who got a cut from the institute as a commission. Okay. Now, that's not what she wanted to do over here. It was a bias clearly in the system where the agent didn't get the money from her, rather got it from the institute. So of course, regardless of what she wanted to do, you kind of put her through that track. It's not the right mindset. It's the same thing for work, right? You have a lot of people that get a cut off your first month's salary. It's pretty typical practice, right? But they kind of mitigate what you truly want to do. And so, the way I put it is you pay for services. You pay for the right services that you need. Anything that's free, you got to be very careful with that because it comes with a cost attached with it, right? And it could be a cost that is very expensive, much more expensive than it would cost you to essentially pay up front and get the appropriate advice that you need, right? And I keep telling people this. I keep telling people that just because it's free doesn't mean it's going to taste good. So that's a very, very important sentiment here, very important perspective. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up, and you spoke a little bit more on the provincial side of things, Donna. I want to dive in a little bit deeper onto that one. So Canada has multiple tiers. Yes, we have the federal, we have the municipal, we have the provincial, and then municipal. And you mentioned there are certain areas, kind of a hotspots, right, where immigrants are, there are better opportunities. Perhaps a lifestyle is better suited for them. It's more attainable financially. There's multiple sort of avenues on why it would appeal. What are those provinces? What would be your advice to people who are listening to you right now, thinking of coming to Canada, but don't really know which province to go to? How would you break that down for them?
Okay. So I wouldn't say that any province is the bad guy per se, because I do think that each province has its own benefits, right?
Yep.
Now, the unfortunate situation is because of word of mouth, and because when you're coming to Canada, you're usually taking advice from the uncle down the road who probably has someone in Mississauga or Brampton or Scarborough, right? You are being sold either Toronto or Vancouver. Right. My parents will tell you this even 20 years ago. Like when my brother moved to Victoria, my dad goes, I didn't even know there was a place like this. No one told me about Victoria. Everyone only told me about Toronto. And that's why we landed here in Toronto. So a lot of immigrants kind of fall into that same unfortunate story where because someone went there, that's the only place they think they can go. So that's what I mean by if you're thinking of coming to Canada, really pull out a map and see, oh, I can go to any of these provinces. And why would I not go to Saskatchewan over Ontario? Does it make sense for me to go to Manitoba versus British Columbia, right? And depending on what line of work that you want to do, what you see yourself doing in Canada, depending on the amount of money that you're bringing in, your financial situation, right? Depending on how quickly you want to do this journey, right? From either whether it's coming with a dual intent where you're looking at a pathway or you're directly coming as a permanent resident. A lot of factors can go into place on choosing the right province. And that's partly why I have a job as well, right? As a consultant, I would advise you on, based on your profile, based on your intentions, based on your long-term goals, based on your financial situation, this is the province you should be looking at, or this is the province you should stay away from. Now, for most people, the provinces that they should stay away from is Ontario or British Columbia, right? Is that true for everyone? No. For some professionals, based on the work that they do, only Ontario or BC would make sense because that kind of line of work doesn't exist anywhere else, right? So if that's the case, then how do you go about it? What are the programs you're looking at? What should you be aware of? So there are easier provinces to immigrate to. I would say, anything other than Ontario or BC would be considerably more hospitable to immigrants, right? Because it wouldn't require you to pass, for example, in Ontario, if you are qualifying under the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, not only do you have to have a job, but the job has to be with an employer who meets that 1 million threshold if the business is in GTA, right? The Greater Toronto Area. So that puts stress on someone who has a job but doesn't necessarily have a job with a medium to large size employer. So you're not competitive enough in Ontario. But if I were to take that same job, for example, go down to another province, Manitoba, for example, that 1 million threshold probably doesn't exist, most likely doesn't exist, right? So now I'm a competitive applicant. So it really depends on your profile, what you want to do, how much money, and I like you're paying for, in the Atlantic provinces, for example, your cost of living, it might be cheaper for you to buy a house, but you're paying more for groceries, you're paying more to go out and eat. So you cost balance out that way, but it is overall cheaper to be in certain provinces versus others. So work with a consultant, work with a lawyer on which province you're choosing for your education to land as a permanent resident, and why or why not that province might make sense for you. Don't just kind of pick it because that's the one you've heard most, right?
Yeah, because if I take a look at Canada in general, it's very diverse. We have, I mean, the opportunities across different provinces are so different, right? That it requires research on where you would be, better fit. Now, if I'm a student coming in, the hotspots are going to be Ontario and BC, perhaps Alberta in some cases, depending on the type of education you're doing, maybe Quebec, right? I mean, the other provinces certainly have a lot of credible institutes and colleges and universities and stuff. But if you take a look at hotspots, it's going to be Ontario and BC, just because, the number of institutes that we have over here that's internationally recognizable is a priority for a lot of people that are going to come here, right? But I think work, you're absolutely right. When it comes to work, I think it really depends, right? There's a lot of political changes just in terms of work, right? So if you are, if you have background in mining, for example, Ontario is probably not going to be a good fit for you, right? Alberta is probably where you want to be, right? They're very pro. They have a lot of roles that align with your background, right? So I think the takeaway, Donna, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that, especially when it comes to work, there's different avenues to kind of build your lifestyle. You got to define what your lifestyle is, right? What is important to you, right? If you're a student, you got a certain type of lifestyle. If you're coming here with family, it's a different type of lifestyle. You got to essentially address what that lifestyle is to you. You got to define that lifestyle. And based on that, you got to figure out which province would be a better fit for you. Maybe you want to come and buy a house, but you're okay to trade the efforts to essentially pay a little bit of a higher grocery, right? Maybe Atlantic Canada, beautiful place. I love Atlantic Canada. It's such a gorgeous place. I love Victoria too, by the way. I've been both. I mean, just the scenery you get over there, it's second to none. You can't compare that to Ontario. I mean, Ontario has some great spots, but you can't really compare the views. But there are some, point is, it's not a one size fits all. I think that's the takeaway. You got to do your research, right? Just a couple of things, Donna, before we wrap up here, right? Just a couple of, we spoke about a lot of things that are certainly challenging. And I think the take home from this particular episode that we're creating is education, right? You got to educate yourself, right? Whether you're coming here as a student or work or coming here with family, you're going to be sold on ideas and dreams and hopes and marketing content, but there's a ground reality, and you need to get that advice from ground reality, right? That's the first thing. And that ground reality spreads across the spectrum. It gives you a reality check. It is a better return on investment, and it provides you an appropriate pathway to come here to Canada. So your longevity over here is a lot smoother than that of if you're not advised properly, right? Just a couple of sort of things that I want to bring up over here. If I take a look at misconceptions in the immigration process at a high level, right? From your experience, what are the top misconceptions? What are the top complaints that you get from students? And maybe you've already mentioned this, and feel free to repeat it, but just based on the number of, because you have a diverse set of people that you work with, right? It's not just students. It's not just people who are doing work. It's diverse. It's very broad. It's different age groups. It's different backgrounds, businesses, etc., etc. Okay, so you have this really wide knowledge base. My question to you is, what are the common denominators of problems that people come to you with?
Once they've landed here or before they're coming here? Like in terms of
let's talk about both. Let's talk about first before them coming here.
Yeah, I think the number one misconception of someone who's not here already, and the biggest kind of misconception that I have to deal with in the education, lies in telling people how they can get a job in Canada, right? So a lot of the times the call is, hi, I want to work in Canada, right? And it goes, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, because as you can imagine, Canada wants to give jobs to either Canadians, permanent residents, or those who have valid status here in Canada already, right? And educating them that you might not be first pick of the lot because of you don't have a work permit, you don't have status, is something that I have to start with, right? I think there's this assumption that if I have money and if I know someone who's told me that this person can help me come to Canada, that all I have to do is drop a lot of cash and I'll get a job in Canada. That fighting that misconception is a big part of dealing with people who are not yet here, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of them take that education kindly and go, oh, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me that. It's good to know that these are the ways that I can come. And I have calls who come back saying, oh, I got a job at TCS and I'll be coming to Canada next year. Perfect. You can do that, right? That was one of the ways that I told you that you can come to Canada. So I think the ones who benefit the most are the ones who don't fight that advice when it sounds new compared to what you've been hearing, doing your homework, because I always back up what I'm telling clients or potential clients with IRCC links, right? Link from Canada.ca. And in advising students and advising people here, I'm very surprised when I'll be speaking to a group of students, immigrants, people who are considering coming to Canada, and I'll ask the crowd, has anyone heard of Canada.ca? And they'll go, I'll just hear crickets, right? Sometimes you'll see the one hand go up, and I'm very excited for that one person. I'll go, please tell the group what lovely information you found there, right? And I think a lot of that is because the information is available. It's there. It's on the website. I think Canada.ca does a good job of putting information out, but sometimes that information can be hidden. Finding it might be hard. Sometimes during COVID, this created a little stress where information was contradictory, right, on IRCC itself. Thankfully, I don't believe we have that problem right now. But the students who are here, the biggest problem is even after you're here, if you're not doing your homework, right, that's a little scary. You should be on Canada.ca every day if you're thinking of staying here long term, if you're a permanent resident and you're looking for options, right? That should be the site that you frequent the most. So I think that those two from outside Canada, it would be, I want to work and how do I do that? And that education. And from inside Canada, like, okay, you're already here. Well, have you taken a look at this resource that the government gives you on how you can go about planning your next steps? And that lack of planning on both ends is what I see.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense, Donna. Any closing comments? I think this episode was just an introductory in terms of the landscape of Canadian immigration. I think we covered the topics pretty well. Over the next couple of episodes, we're gonna kind of dive in deeper into different elements of immigration, right? There's a lot of things we're working on together, Donna, as well. We bring that about, so we know where the problems lies. We know where the opportunities lies. We know how to essentially give a helping hand when needed, right? That's what we're focused on, and it's the same sentiment that Donna and I share on that. Now, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be rolling out episodes to kind of talk about these different things. But any closing comments, Donna?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the questions. I hope this helps a lot of people, and we will be monitoring our comment section if we have one soon for what you want to see, and we hope to answer all your questions soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Donna. Thank you. Take care.
Daddy, bye-bye.
Bye.